Welcome to Bedtime Biographies, where we take a peaceful journey through the lives of remarkable individuals from history. Tonight, we drift into the world of one of the most fascinating minds humanity has ever known, Leonardo da Vinci. As you settle in, close your eyes and take a slow, deep breath. Imagine stepping into Renaissance Italy, where the river Arno murmurs softly beneath bridges of warm stone, and candlelight flickers through the windows of Florentine workshops. Horses clop quietly down narrow alleys, and merchants call gently to one another under the fading sun. You find yourself in a world of parchment, paint, and possibilities, a world where ideas live not just in books, but in the air, in the water, and in the stars. A place where curiosity was not just encouraged, but celebrated. In this quiet night, let us begin the story of a man who saw the world not just for what it was, but for what it could be. A man who turned observation into invention, sketches into science, and silence into inspiration. Let us journey now into the life of Leonardo da Vinci, a painter, inventor, engineer, anatomist, musician, and eternal dreamer. Leonardo da Vinci was born on April 15th, 1452, in the small, sleepy Tuscan town of Vinci, nestled amid the olive groves and hills of Italy. It was a world of rolling landscapes and stone paths, of quiet fields and sunlit streams. Leonardo was born out of wedlock to a notary, Ser Piero, and a peasant woman, Caterina. His beginnings were humble yet filled with contrast, one foot in the world of scholars, the other in the world of farmers. From an early age, Leonardo was drawn to the world around him, as though every tree and bird was whispering secrets waiting to be understood. He would spend hours lying in the grass, watching clouds drift by or crouch beside a brook, marveling at the swirl of water over stone. The natural world was not just scenery to Leonardo, it was his first teacher. Though he did not receive a formal classical education, Leonardo had access to a variety of texts through his father's connections. More importantly, he had freedom. The freedom to wander, to explore, to create. He began drawing at a young age, sketching everything he saw: birds in flight, twisted tree roots, the folds of cloth. He observed how the wind bent grasses, how light shifted across a wall, how a cat moved before it pounced. As a child, he was fascinated by movement, how things worked, how they functioned. He would pull apart toys and attempt to rebuild them. He fashioned crude models of birds and attempted to make them fly. He created small mechanical contraptions and sketched them meticulously. Leonardo's daily life was often quiet, but rich with sensory detail. He awoke with the sun and listened to the distant chiming of the church bells from the village square. The air was crisp in the morning and often carried the earthy scent of tilled soil and crushed olives. He helped in the kitchen garden, tended to animals, and watched craftsmen repair tools or mend fences, tasks that fascinated him more than they bored him. He didn't see chores. He saw systems, levers, and causes with their effects. He would climb the trees and observe the countryside from above, drawing the winding roads, the shapes of farms, the way people moved below. The rooftops, carts, and distant towers became miniature worlds. He began to understand perspective intuitively long before he would formally study it as an artist. It was this relentless curiosity that would shape the course of his life. While most children his age were focused on chores or play, Leonardo was already trying to understand the principles of nature itself. His notebooks from later in life reflect this early passion. "Learn first to observe," he wrote. "The eye, which is called the window of the soul, is the principal means by which the central sense can most completely and abundantly appreciate the infinite works of nature." Though illegitimate and excluded from certain career paths, like the law or the priesthood, Leonardo's unique birth may have been a gift. It freed him from the rigid expectations of aristocratic life, allowing him to follow his passions without constraint. He was also not alone in his youth. While his mother married another man and moved away, Leonardo was raised primarily in the household of his father, Ser Piero, and his extended family. He grew up alongside half-siblings, though his relationship with them remained distant throughout much of his life. Despite these social complications, Leonardo was cared for and given a level of support that many children of his background would never receive. His environment shaped him profoundly. Vinci, surrounded by nature, offered endless inspiration. From the flocks of birds wheeling overhead to the intricate networks of streams and mills, everything seemed to be in motion, in harmony, and Leonardo watched it all with a keen eye and a notebook in hand. He would often wander into the hills alone, sketching plants, collecting rocks, and observing the shadows cast by leaves. These moments of solitude were not lonely, they were contemplative, a personal dialogue with the world. Later, when he became one of the greatest anatomists of his time, he would attribute much of his insight to those early days spent in quiet communion with nature. He had a deep fascination with water. As a boy, he would dam small streams with pebbles and watch how the flow changed, then try to predict the new patterns. He would sketch the eddies, the ripples, the reflection of light, and he began to understand how force and movement were part of every system. Water, he believed, was the key to life's motion. Leonardo also had a vivid imagination. He would dream of mechanical devices, fantastical animals, and giant structures. He turned his drawings into experiments, turning the floor of his room into a miniature lab. His dreams were never idle, they were questions posed to the universe. Despite his growing talent, Leonardo remained humble and soft-spoken. He preferred silence to noise, study to gossip, and observation to argument. Teachers found him odd but brilliant, and he learned best by doing. He was also known to be incredibly kind. He would often buy caged birds at the market only to set them free. He observed their flight, their behavior, their reactions to the wind, but never through cruelty. His empathy extended not only to humans but to all living things. In the evening, when other children returned to noisy homes, Leonardo sat with parchment and candlelight, sketching whatever remained in his memory: the swirl of a goat's horn, the veins of a leaf, the arc of a rainbow after rainfall. These drawings weren't merely exercises, they were records of a mind seeking structure and significance in everything it encountered. He had very few close friends as a boy, not out of unkindness, but because he was often absorbed in his thoughts. He did not fit easily into groups. But those who knew him remembered his serenity, his unfailing politeness, and the unspoken sense that he was always looking at the world through a different lens. He was equally curious about people. He studied expressions, gestures, posture. He would sit in the town square and quietly observe conversations without participating. Later, this sensitivity would allow him to capture human emotion in ways no artist had done before. Even before he understood art, Leonardo understood detail. He noticed the way a person shifted their weight when they were anxious, or how a smile touched the eyes before it reached the mouth. These insights made him a keen observer not only of nature but of the human condition. He didn't just watch life, he absorbed it. As he grew older, his interest in music began to take form. He learned to play the lyre and would often entertain guests with improvised melodies. Music, like drawing, was another language to Leonardo, one that helped him express what words often could not. He was said to be charming in conversation when he did speak. His voice was gentle, and his ideas were expressed with clarity and care. Though young, he spoke as though he had lived many lives already, his wisdom soft and unassuming. Some evenings, after his work and walks were finished, he would climb to the top of a hill and sit beneath the stars. There he would contemplate the moon, the planets, the great expanse of sky above him. Even as a child, he sensed that the universe was a grand, interconnected machine, and he yearned to understand it. These childhood years were more than formative. They were foundational. Leonardo developed not just a curiosity, but a philosophy, that truth and beauty resided in the smallest of things, in the curve of a petal, or the arc of a bird's wing. As the sun set over the fields of Vinci each day, Leonardo would return to his small home, eyes still filled with wonder, hands often stained with charcoal. and mind buzzing with questions. This was the beginning of a life that would never stop seeking answers. At the age of 14, Leonardo's father arranged for him to become an apprentice in the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, a renowned artist and master craftsman in Florence. Verrocchio's workshop was one of the busiest and most respected in the city, a hub of creativity where art met science, where commissions were large and learning was constant. The first time Leonardo stepped into the workshop, he must have been overwhelmed. The smell of linseed oil and fresh-cut wood, the chatter of assistants grinding pigments, the sight of half-finished sculptures and glowing canvases. It was a place where transformation happened daily. Wood became saints, stone became angels, pigment turned into light and shadow. And here, among older apprentices, Leonardo found his second home. He learned everything: how to mix colors from minerals and earth, how to stretch and prime canvases, how to pour bronze into molds, and how to sketch from live models. Verrocchio was not only a painter, but a sculptor and engineer. Leonardo's training was multidisciplinary from the start. One of the earliest signs of his brilliance came during the collaboration on the baptism of Christ. Verrocchio assigned Leonardo the task of painting one of the angels. When Verrocchio saw Leonardo's finished section, the softness, the divine serenity, the lifelike quality, he was stunned. According to legend, Verrocchio set down his brush and never painted again. Whether fact or fable, the story reflects how unmistakable Leonardo's gift already was. Florence, in the 15th century, was the beating heart of the Renaissance. The city bustled with sculptors, poets, philosophers, merchants, and architects. Every street echoed with the energy of rebirth, where ancient wisdom met bold new ideas. The Duomo rose like a mountain over the skyline, a symbol of what human ingenuity could accomplish. Leonardo would study it obsessively, sketching it from every angle, wondering how it had been engineered. When not in the workshop, Leonardo wandered through the city, sketchbook in hand. He observed the way light reflected off the Arno River at different times of day, how shadows fell beneath archways, how crowds moved in the market square. He visited churches to study religious artwork, noting the posture of saints and the emotional expressions of martyrs. His hunger to learn extended beyond the visual. He took an interest in literature, music, mathematics, and anatomy. Verrocchio, recognizing Leonardo's insatiable curiosity, allowed him greater freedom than most apprentices. He encouraged Leonardo to experiment, to question. In addition to traditional training, Leonardo began studying geometry and perspective. He would practice drawing objects from multiple angles and distances, eventually developing techniques that would revolutionize painting. He was fascinated by anatomy and would sneak away to observe the sick and the injured, making notes of how bones and muscles aligned beneath the skin. He began dissecting small animals, fish, birds, rodents, attempting to understand their internal structures. The seeds of his later anatomical mastery were already being planted. At night, Leonardo often stayed late in the studio after others had gone. In the flickering light of oil lamps, he would copy sculptures, draw detailed studies of the human hand, or try to render the way a curtain folded under its own weight. He filled dozens of pages with seemingly mundane studies, shoes, tools, tree bark. But to him, every object was a puzzle and a lesson. His notebooks from this time are full of observational sketches and scattered thoughts written in mirror script. Some entries include philosophical musings like, "The painter who draws merely by practice and by eye, without any reason, is like a mirror which copies everything placed in front of it without being conscious of their existence." He began gaining small commissions of his own, altarpieces, decorative panels, and preliminary sketches for larger works. His growing reputation reached the ears of wealthy patrons and clerics, and though many projects were never completed, his talent became undeniable. As an apprentice, he also had to assist with more mundane tasks, mixing plaster, preparing canvases, cleaning brushes, and sometimes grinding pigments for hours. These moments, however, never dulled his enthusiasm. He treated each task as part of a larger tapestry of understanding. Even the act of mixing colors fascinated him, the chemistry, the interaction of materials, the subtle variations in hue. What set Leonardo apart most was his sense of wonder. He once wrote, "There are three classes of people: those who see when they are shown, and those who do not see." Leonardo had always belonged to the first class. As he moved further into his apprenticeship, Verrocchio began consulting him on complex problems: mechanical design, proportion, spatial layout. In time, Leonardo became more of a collaborator than a student. He also made connections outside the workshop. The Medici court was a place of intellectual exchange, where artists rubbed shoulders with astronomers and humanists. Leonardo found himself welcomed into these circles, even if he often preferred listening to speaking. His insights, when shared, were always thoughtful and profound. One of Leonardo's earliest independent masterpieces was Annunciation, in which the angel Gabriel visits the Virgin Mary. The piece, attributed in part to his work, displayed his growing mastery of spatial depth, naturalistic detail, and emotional subtlety. The landscape behind the figures is alive: mountains, water, vegetation, every element carefully chosen. Yet even as he grew more skilled, Leonardo was not always satisfied. He often left works unfinished, not out of carelessness, but because new questions had already pulled his attention elsewhere. He would rather explore than repeat, rather question than conclude. By his late teens, Leonardo's name was beginning to appear in the records of independent commissions. Though still working with Verrocchio, he had clearly outgrown the role of apprentice. He was becoming a master in his own right. He continued to sketch relentlessly. He drew flying machines based on bird wings, devices to move water uphill, complex bridges and gears. Most of these designs were not intended for construction, at least not yet. They were exercises in imagination, in problem solving. Leonardo believed that no question was too large or too small to explore. In his private life, Leonardo lived simply. He dressed well but modestly, avoided gossip, and spent most of his time in thought or work. He was known for his cleanliness and his appreciation for vegetarian food, rare for his time. Animals to him were beings worthy of respect and observation. His devotion to art and science was nearly monastic. He would spend days studying the curvature of a smile, the geometry of a seashell, or the way fabric draped over a shoulder. He believed the divine could be found in the details. As he approached his 20th birthday, Leonardo had already grown beyond the walls of Verrocchio's studio. Florence had given him tools, guidance, and exposure, but his mind was reaching further. The city had nurtured him, but it could no longer contain him. This chapter of his life, of learning, of quiet study, of apprenticeship, was coming to an end. Yet before that transition, there were still moments that would shape his soul and sharpen his vision. One particular episode occurred during the creation of a large altarpiece, commissioned by a local Florentine church. Leonardo was assigned to paint a background landscape. What began as a minor task soon became the most talked about part of the painting. He painted winding paths, distant villages, mist-covered hills, and a river so realistically rendered that it seemed to flow off the canvas. His mastery of atmospheric perspective astounded both his peers and patrons. In another instance, while assisting on a sculpture, Leonardo questioned the balance of the figure's weight. He built a clay model to demonstrate how the posture would collapse over time if cast incorrectly. Verrocchio watched in silence, then nodded, and corrected the original mold. It was not pride, but trust in Leonardo's analytical eye. These small victories reinforced Leonardo's belief that observation and experimentation must guide creation. His fellow apprentices sometimes felt a quiet frustration. While they followed instructions dutifully, Leonardo would finish his tasks and then improve them. He reimagined compositions, suggested better angles, even recalculated architectural proportions on their designs. Some admired him, others envied him, but all recognized his difference. His thoughts also turned increasingly toward the idea of unity between art and nature. He began keeping a separate notebook filled with philosophical notes. In it, he wrote, "Nature is the source of all true knowledge. She has no effect without cause, nor invention without necessity." It was a radical notion at the time, blending empirical observation with metaphysical insight. As his skills blossomed, he also developed a sensitivity to the human condition. He would often visit the hospitals of Florence, where he spoke gently with the injured, the poor, and the elderly. He sketched them too, not out of morbid fascination, but because he saw in them truths about the body, resilience, and emotion that academic models could never show. In those final months before he left Verrocchio's workshop, Leonardo completed a series of anatomical sketches that would later be considered groundbreaking. He dissected birds to study the mechanics of flight and compared their anatomy to human arms. He wrote pages on proportion, balance, and symmetry, laying the foundation for what would eventually become the Vitruvian Man. It was becoming increasingly clear to those around him that Leonardo was destined for more than workshop commissions. He was asking questions that reached into philosophy, biology, engineering, and metaphysics. And though he remained humble, his quiet intensity was unmistakable. By the spring of 1472, Leonardo's name appeared in the register of the Painters' Guild of Florence. He was no longer an apprentice. He was free to take on his own students, his own commissions, and to chart his own course. But even as he stepped out from Verrocchio's shadow, he carried with him every lesson about discipline, form, humility, and the endless potential that lay within the union of observation and imagination. His time in Florence had lit the spark. Now, the world beyond its walls awaited the fire. The next chapter would see Leonardo step into the wider world with his own vision, his own name, and a fire of curiosity that would never dim. During these last days in the studio, he also took great care in helping younger apprentices. He was patient with their questions, often guiding them not with direct instruction, but by asking them questions in return, nudging them toward discovery rather than simply handing them answers. He believed deeply in learning through experience. For Leonardo, education was not about memorization, but exploration. He also began experimenting with different materials and surfaces. He tested mixtures of oil and egg-based paints, tried new varnishes, and designed specialized brushes for finer detail. He noted how colors changed in candlelight versus daylight and wrote about the emotional impact of color on the viewer. It was during this time that Leonardo first began outlining his thoughts for a treatise on painting. Though it would never be completed in his lifetime, he envisioned a work that would elevate painting to a science, detailing the laws of light, shadow, perspective, and anatomy. He believed the painter should be as knowledgeable as any doctor, architect, or philosopher. On the evenings when he walked alone, crossing over the Arno, or sitting quietly beneath a loggia, Leonardo would reflect on what art could mean. He had seen faces carved in marble, heard hymns echo through chapels, watched dancers move like living statues. All these expressions, he thought, were glimpses of a truth that could not be written, but only felt. By the time he packed his tools and walked out of Verrocchio's workshop for the last time, Leonardo was no longer just a gifted apprentice. He was a visionary. A quiet one, perhaps, a private one. But in his notebooks, in his sketches, and in the clarity of his gaze, the world could already sense that something new was about to begin. After earning his place in the Guild of St. Luke in 1472, Leonardo da Vinci stepped into a new world, a world where his name alone now carried weight. He was no longer an apprentice hidden beneath the shadow of a master. He was a free man, a painter, an inventor, and a thinker. The city of Florence lay open before him, and beyond it, the courts of Italy beckoned. Though Florence was familiar, it was also evolving rapidly. The Medici family, powerful patrons of the arts, held sway over politics, banking, and culture. Their patronage created a golden age in the city, attracting artists, architects, and intellectuals from all across Europe. For a young man like Leonardo, it was the ideal place to build a reputation. He rented a modest studio near the heart of the city and began taking commissions. His first years were filled with promise, though not all of his work survived the test of time. He painted altarpieces, designed costumes for pageants and festivals, and sketched endlessly. He took on apprentices and gained a following. But Leonardo's mind often shifted from one project to the next, captivated by new challenges before completing the old. One of the most important commissions during this period was the Adoration of the Magi, commissioned in 1481 for the monastery of San Donato. Though never completed, the painting is one of Leonardo's most studied and revealing works. The composition was revolutionary for its time, chaotic, expressive, brimming with symbolic elements and narrative depth. Figures in the painting reach, whisper, kneel, and look on with wonder and unease. The architecture in the background appears as classical ruins, representing the fall of the pagan world and the rise of Christianity. Art historians continue to marvel at Leonardo's bold approach, choosing to portray the moment not as a serene nativity, but as a tense, almost tumultuous event. The Virgin Mary at the center radiates calm amidst the swirl of motion. The expressions of those around her hint at individual stories and thoughts. The painting showed Leonardo's growing confidence in using the human form to convey emotion and psychology. Leonardo's workshop during these years was a place of experimentation. He employed young assistants, delegated small parts of his larger commissions, and even explored new materials and pigments. He spent time developing his own recipes for varnishes and binding agents, experimenting to increase the longevity and luminosity of his works. Around this time, Leonardo also began to pursue his scientific studies in earnest. He dissected animals to understand their musculature. He studied birds in flight and made sketches of mechanical wings. He examined the branching of trees and the curling of water as it splashed over rocks. His notebooks from these years are filled with wonder, both observational drawings and philosophical reflections. To Leonardo, the world was a machine, but a beautiful one, filled with divine proportion and logic. One notebook includes an early drawing of what would later become known as the aerial screw, a spiral-shaped flying device, a forerunner to the helicopter. Another page features cross-sections of skulls and jawbones, rendered with the accuracy of a surgeon. He believed that to depict the human body in art, one must understand it from the inside out. Despite his brilliance, Leonardo faced many challenges in Florence. While he was admired, he was also enigmatic, known for his withdrawn nature and for not delivering finished commissions promptly. Patrons grew impatient. His peers, such as Botticelli and Ghirlandaio, enjoyed more consistent success, partly due to their political alliances and social maneuvering. In Florence, Leonardo found both inspiration and limitation. He yearned for more resources, more freedom, more opportunity. He began to look toward the great courts of Italy, where rulers valued engineers as much as artists. And so, in the early 1480s, he left Florence and traveled to Milan. Before his arrival, Leonardo penned a remarkable letter to Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan. It was not a boastful document, but a strategic one. He described himself as a military engineer capable of designing bridges, tunnels, and weapons. He outlined plans for armored vehicles and water-lifting devices. Only at the end did he add that he was also skilled in painting and sculpture. The letter worked. Ludovico invited Leonardo to his court. Milan was different from Florence, less artistic, more political, and more rigidly hierarchical. But it offered Leonardo the chance to work across disciplines, to combine his artistic gifts with engineering and design. In Milan, Leonardo took on a variety of roles. He designed stage machinery and costumes for court spectacles. He drafted plans for new fortifications. He studied canal systems and proposed ways to improve irrigation and water transport. He continued his anatomical investigations and he painted, slowly, methodically. He also began work on an ambitious equestrian statue, a monument to Ludovico's father, Francesco Sforza. The statue was to be the largest of its kind in the world. Leonardo spent years studying horse anatomy, building clay models, and perfecting his design. He envisioned a casting process unlike any that had been done before. But war intervened, and the bronze intended for the statue was repurposed for cannons. The monument was never completed, yet this failure did not diminish his reputation. Leonardo's talents were widely recognized. He became known not just for his artistry, but for his inventions, his intellect, and his uncanny ability to envision the future. He was a man ahead of his time, often speaking of technologies that would not be realized for centuries. He also collaborated with architects and city planners to propose ideal city layouts, visions that prioritize sanitation, green spaces, and transportation flow. These plans reflected not only his engineering prowess, but also his empathy for the well-being of urban life. During these years, Leonardo created The Last Supper, one of the most famous paintings in history. Commissioned for the dining hall of the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie, the mural depicts the moment when Jesus announces that one of his disciples will betray him. Unlike previous depictions, Leonardo focused on the emotional reactions of each apostle. The result was a masterpiece of psychological storytelling. He experimented with a new technique, painting on dry plaster rather than wet fresco, to allow for greater detail. Unfortunately, this method proved unstable, and the painting began to deteriorate soon after its completion. Still, its power endures. The composition, the gestures, the emotion, they speak to something universal. Leonardo's reputation brought him into contact with scholars, diplomats, and inventors from across Europe. He exchanged ideas with mathematicians and doctors, studied ancient texts, and debated philosophical questions of the day. His studio became a crossroads of intellect and innovation. By the late 1490s, Leonardo had firmly established himself as a court artist, engineer, and thinker. He lived comfortably, though he never amassed great wealth. His satisfaction came from ideas, from puzzles, from discovery. His notebooks from this time are filled with inventions, a rotating bridge for use in battle, a machine for testing the tensile strength of materials, and sketches of human organs. He pondered the movement of celestial bodies, the mechanics of breathing, and the optical principles behind vision. Though he was respected, Leonardo was still a solitary figure. He never married, never had children. His closest companions were his students and assistants, including the devoted Francesco Melzi. He enjoyed music, wore fine clothes, and maintained a refined demeanor, yet he remained elusive. His Milanese years were some of the most productive of his life. They were marked by a blend of creativity, experimentation, and intellectual depth. He had finally found a place that allowed him to be not just a painter or an engineer, but both and more. By the turn of the century, as political tensions rose and French forces invaded Milan, Leonardo's time at the court came to an end. During these final years in Milan, Leonardo increasingly turned inward. His sketches became more introspective, with studies of facial expressions, aged hands, and sorrowful eyes. He grew fascinated with the inner workings of the heart, mapping its chambers and valves with astonishing detail. He also recorded detailed observations on the nervous system, speculating about how the senses functioned, a line of thought that prefigured modern neuroscience. He also engaged in philosophical reflection, often writing brief meditations in the margins of his notebooks. "As a well-spent day brings happy sleep," he wrote, "so a well-employed life brings a happy death." Such thoughts suggest a man not only preoccupied with mechanics and paint, but with mortality, purpose, and the soul. Even amidst the uncertainty of the political climate, he remained a sought-after figure. Foreign dignitaries sought his company, and his studio was a destination for those seeking enlightenment on art, science, or the mysteries of life itself. His fame extended far beyond the cities where he had lived, his name whispered in courts, salons, and universities across Europe. His ability to cross disciplines earned admiration, but also confusion. Some saw him as an artist who dabbled in science, others as a scientist who painted. In truth, Leonardo rejected such boundaries. To him, knowledge was one, fluid, connected, and infinite. Whether studying the proportions of the human skull or the swirl of water in a basin, he was guided by a belief that nature followed elegant, discoverable laws. His notes from this time reveal an unrelenting pursuit of understanding. He devised mirrors to simulate optical illusions. He calculated how light might bounce through translucent objects. He compared the flow of air through a flute to the movement of blood through veins. In each observation, he sought not just facts, but patterns, the poetry of existence revealed through form. He also sketched whimsical designs, imaginary beasts, laughing faces, grotesque caricatures. These playful interludes hint at a man with humor, with curiosity about human nature in all its shapes. They provide contrast to his more serious studies and show the fullness of his vision. When the French finally took Milan in 1499, Leonardo left quietly. He carried with him a handful of trusted students, several unfinished canvases, and trunks filled with manuscripts and sketches, his legacy in paper and ink. Though he would find new patrons and continue his work elsewhere, the Milanese period marked a peak in his intellectual and artistic journey, a season of flourishing that proved, more than anything, the breadth of his genius. He would be forced to move again. But the legacy of his Milanese years was already set. In the quiet evenings of Milan, Leonardo would sometimes sit at his window, watching the stars emerge over the city skyline. He believed that understanding the cosmos was as important as understanding the body. His notes are filled with musings on astronomy, speculating on the moon's reflected light, the motion of the planets, and the shape of the earth. He imagined a harmony that stretched from the tiniest veins of a leaf to the vast movements of celestial bodies. He also took time to observe human life around him, the habits of merchants, the bustle of the marketplace, the laughter of children. His sketches included street performers, beggars, musicians, and mothers with infants. He seemed endlessly drawn to the common person, not just kings and saints. To Leonardo, every life carried poetry. He would occasionally retreat into solitude, not out of loneliness, but for reflection. His assistants noted how he could fall into silence for hours, absorbed in a single line of a drawing or the curve of a shell. These quiet moments were not idle, they were deeply generative, where insight and art were born together. Leonardo also kept a growing interest in water. He believed it was the driving force of nature. He spent hours watching rivers, studying currents, eddies, and erosion. He proposed methods to control flooding, designed water wheels, and even theorized about the life cycle of the earth based on the movement of water. His fascination with hydraulics would eventually inform not only engineering, but his depiction of flowing fabrics, hair, and clouds in his paintings. As his time in Milan came to a close, Leonardo began compiling his thoughts into treatises. He wrote on painting, anatomy, geometry, and mechanics, documents that, though unfinished in his lifetime, would later astound the world. They were not dry manuals, but philosophical explorations, a merging of art and science through the lens of a restless and tender mind. Though he had moved through courts and cities, through storms of war and peace, what endured was not just his work, but his way of seeing, precise, curious, reverent. It was in Milan that this vision crystallized, and in Milan that Leonardo, the man and the myth, came fully into being. He had proven that the mind could span disciplines, that beauty and logic could coexist, and that a single person, through observation, imagination, and relentless curiosity, could reshape how we see the world. As Leonardo stepped away from the political upheaval of Milan and sought new horizons, he carried with him not only unfinished canvases and trunks of papers, but a mind overflowing with dreams. These dreams were not fleeting or fantastical. They were structured, observed, and often recorded in mirror-written script across thousands of pages. This was the season of his most prolific intellectual flowering. He wandered through Italy, finding brief sanctuary with various patrons, yet always retreating into the quiet intimacy of his notebooks, which had become the true stage of his genius. Leonardo's notebooks are perhaps the most extraordinary documents ever produced by a single human mind. Bound loosely or kept in folded pages, they are filled with sketches of machines, dissections of human bodies, architectural blueprints, botanical studies, musical theory, geometry, and riddles. But more than technical diagrams, they are love letters to curiosity itself. One might open a page to find a design for a flying machine, its wings modelled after bats, with notes on how a man might propel himself through air. On the next page, a drawing of a fetus curled in a womb, tenderly shaded, surrounded by Leonardo's speculations on reproduction. Next, a violent whirlpool traced in black ink, spinning with the same ferocity that he saw in both rivers and battlefields. He called it il moto perpetuo, the perpetual motion, the rhythm of life mirrored in water. Flight obsessed him. Birds, he believed, held a secret to divine mechanics. He watched them soar above fields and cliffs, studied their skeletal structures, and mimicked their wing patterns in his sketches. He even constructed small gliders and parachute prototypes, some of which modern engineers have built and proven functional centuries later. He once wrote, "Once you have tasted flight, you will forever walk the earth with your eyes turned skyward." Yet his genius wasn't confined to the skies. On Earth, he dreamed of cities built on logic and sanitation, with flowing water systems, underground sewers, and raised roads to separate pedestrians from traffic. He sketched mechanical bridges that could be deployed swiftly in times of war, rotating cranes to aid in construction, and gears that transformed wind and water power into movement. In another section of his notebooks, he designed war machines, armored tanks shaped like turtles, multi-barreled cannons, and siege ladders. Some of these were intended to impress patrons, others to explore the tension between innovation and destruction. Leonardo was not a warmonger, but he understood that to secure patronage in Renaissance courts, one had to serve both peace and war. He also turned his attention inward, to the human form. Few had ever studied anatomy as obsessively as Leonardo. He dissected dozens of corpses, both human and animal, carefully documenting every tendon, muscle, organ, and bone. His anatomical drawings are still admired for their accuracy and artistry. He studied how the eye perceives light, how the tongue forms speech, and how the spine supports balance. He viewed the body as a machine, but it was also sacred. His Vitruvian Man, the famous sketch of a male figure inscribed in a circle and square, symbolized the harmony between man and universe, flesh and mathematics. It wasn't just art, it was a cosmology. And still, Leonardo was driven by more than facts. He wrote fables, aphorisms, and reflections in the margins of his work. He mused on the silence of fish, the patience of trees, and the cruelty of man. He lamented how people admired the appearance of things but not their substance. "The eye, which is called the window of the soul," he wrote, "is the chief means by which the central sense can most completely and abundantly appreciate the infinite works of nature." He rarely stopped to publish his findings. Instead, he amassed an archive that he never completed, never organized, and never shared. He planned great treatises on painting, architecture, and mechanics, but he finished few. His perfectionism, combined with an ever-widening curiosity, often left his greatest ideas trapped in notes. But within those fragments lived wonder. The notebooks reflect a man who could look at a leaf and see both its beauty and its mathematical precision, who could watch water dripping from a rock and imagine machines powered by that same rhythm, who could study the arc of a smile and then give it to the world in the Mona Lisa. And while many of his paintings remained unfinished or lost to time, the ones he completed continued to captivate. St. John the Baptist, completed late in his life, depicts the saint emerging from darkness, pointing upward with a mysterious smile. It's a spiritual echo of the Mona Lisa, filled with ambiguity, invitation, and reverence. Leonardo's designs for stage sets and special effects also fascinated audiences. He engineered artificial heavens that opened with stars, mechanical dragons that breathed smoke, and illusions that made actors appear to fly. He once proposed a festival where a dome would open to reveal a clockwork zodiac with angels descending on ropes. These performances merged engineering, storytelling, and spectacle in ways far ahead of his time. In this period of wandering, Leonardo's days were marked by solitude and reflection. He spent long hours walking through forests or beside rivers, his mind turning over the secrets of nature. He studied how sunlight filtered through leaves and how shadows curved around stone. He observed insects with the same reverence he gave to kings. He also dabbled in cartography. His maps, drawn with extraordinary precision, often included topographical features long before modern surveying methods. One map of the Arno Valley is so detailed that modern analysts have found it accurate to within a few meters. These were not mere illustrations. They were tools of planning, observation, and admiration. Leonardo designed a system of locks and canals to improve river navigation and imagined a city divided by function: markets below, dwellings above, roads separated from waste and runoff. Though never realized, these designs echo the infrastructure we now strive for centuries later: clean, efficient, and humane. In his notebooks from this time, Leonardo made a striking sketch: a man in chains beside a quote, "Nothing strengthens authority so much as silence." Scholars debate its meaning, but many see it as Leonardo's quiet protest against repression and censorship, a whisper from a man who believed deeply in the freedom of inquiry. During quiet evenings, he would test his devices with wooden models, winding gears with the soft creak of tension. He spent hours refining the angle of a screw, the teeth of a gear, the swing of a pendulum. To him, precision was not just technical, it was poetic. Each invention was like a stanza in a broader poem of nature's design. Visitors who encountered Leonardo during this time described a man of calm demeanor, who listened more than he spoke, whose laughter was rare but genuine. They noted his compassion for animals, for the poor, for those who suffered ignorance. He bought caged birds only to release them and fed stray animals in the streets of Florence. Such small acts painted a fuller picture of his character. His understanding of movement, of how muscles stretch, how joints rotate, how water flows and air swirls, found expression in every line he drew. He developed studies on how to depict emotions through posture alone. In one note, he lists every muscle used when someone frowns, and in another he diagrams how joy lifts the corners of the mouth. He believed art should speak before a word was uttered. By the time Leonardo reached his 50s, his fame was widespread, but his restlessness remained. He had become both legend and mystery. He walked the thin line between being celebrated and being misunderstood. To many, he was a master of everything. To others, a man who never finished what he started. And yet, it is this vastness, the refusal to be one thing, that defines him. In his notebooks, there is no clear boundary between art and science, nature and spirit, poetry and diagram. His legacy is not just what he made, but how he saw, and how he taught others to see. As Leonardo entered the final chapter of his life, he sought something he had long craved: peace. After decades of restless invention, courtly obligations, and unrelenting curiosity, he accepted an invitation that would bring him to a place of serenity. In 1516, at the age of 64, Leonardo da Vinci left Italy for France, answering the call of King Francis I. The king, an admirer of art and knowledge, welcomed Leonardo not as a mere artisan, but as a treasured guest, a sage from another age. He travelled across the Alps with a small entourage: his devoted pupil Francesco Melzi, a few loyal servants and precious belongings, sketches, manuscripts, unfinished paintings, and the Mona Lisa, which he continued to refine even in his later years. They arrived at the Château du Clos in the Loire Valley, a charming manor house not far from the royal residence at Amboise. It was here that Leonardo would spend his final days. France was different. The rhythms of court life were less frantic, and the king's interest in philosophy and conversation gave Leonardo space to simply be. He was not expected to paint on demand or construct military contraptions. Instead, he advised on matters of architecture, urban planning, and waterworks. He designed canals for navigation, conceived theatrical pageants for the court, and shared his knowledge freely with those who came seeking it. The manor at Clos became a sanctuary. Its garden bloomed with wild herbs and medicinal plants. Birds chirped in the ivy-covered walls. In the mornings, Leonardo would sit in the sunlight, sketching the movement of light through leaves. In the evenings, He and the king would talk about the heavens, about the shape of the human soul, about the stories art could tell without a single word spoken. Though his hands had begun to fail him, stiffened with age and possibly stroke, his mind remained as fertile as ever. Melzi, his constant companion, transcribed his dictations, preserving Leonardo's late reflections. These musings were deeply human. He questioned mortality, the nature of divine creation, and the responsibility of those who seek truth. He wrote, "As a well-spent day brings happy sleep, so a well-employed life brings a happy death." Leonardo's sketches from this time were softer, more reflective. He turned his eye not to grand machines but to delicate observations, an old man's hands, the sag of an aged tree, the calm of ripples in a basin. Each line carried the weight of a lifetime spent seeing the world deeply. Visitors came from across Europe to meet the maestro. Artists, architects, engineers, and nobles alike sat at his table, hoping for a spark of insight. King Francis I, who once declared Leonardo the greatest man who ever lived, often embraced him publicly, a sign of affection and reverence rare for the time. The king often visited Leonardo at Clos Luce, sometimes walking the short path from his chateau to spend hours in discussion. He admired not only Leonardo's wisdom, but his gentleness, his humor, and the tranquility he exuded in old age. Leonardo had become something more than an artist. He had become a philosopher, a keeper of sacred knowledge. Leonardo's days followed a gentle rhythm. He rose with the sun, dictated notes and reflections, reviewed his older works, and strolled through the gardens. In quiet hours, he would study birds or clouds or simply sit in contemplation. His dining table was humble, but always shared. He continued his practice of feeding stray animals, and his kindness became legend among those who served the household. Melzi often remarked that Leonardo's memory remained razor-sharp. He could recall poems from his youth, mechanical designs from decades prior, and names of patrons long deceased. But his greatest joy came from teaching. He spoke often to Melzi and visitors about perspective, proportion, light, and anatomy. His lessons were always framed by deep philosophical insight. To Leonardo, understanding art meant understanding nature, and understanding nature was the first step to understanding oneself. He occasionally travelled the short distance to the royal court, where he would present ideas or marvels, portable models of machines, ingenious tools, or architectural sketches. He even imagined designing a perfect city for the king, one with wide, clean boulevards, accessible waterways, and natural airflow for hygiene. While these ideas were not realized in his lifetime, they would echo centuries later in modern city planning. One cold winter evening, Leonardo is said to have taken King Francis by the hand and shown him a device that mimicked the heart's motion using bellows and levers. "This," Leonardo said softly, "is how the heart sings its quiet song." The king was moved to silence, and it's said that tears welled in his eyes. Though weakened, Leonardo remained deeply engaged with the world. He studied weather patterns, took notes on the behavior of snails, and speculated about the structure of fossils. He pondered the relationships between stars and tides and the cycles of birth and decay. He spoke less, but when he did, his words carried great weight. He often revisited his older works, not to admire them, but to question them. He would gently critique his past ideas, amend notes in the margins, and marvel at how time had refined his understanding. His notebooks grew more philosophical. He compared life to water, ever-flowing, changing, shaping everything it touched. He had become fascinated with dreams. He recorded several in his final years, images of flying through clouds, of machines becoming birds, of an endless spiral staircase rising into a star-filled sky. These dreams, written in delicate script, blurred the line between imagination and spiritual longing. Some believed Leonardo was nearing a revelation, though he would never name it. His health declined slowly, like the fading of twilight. By the spring of 1519, he knew his end was near. He arranged his affairs with care, bequeathing his notebooks, tools, and artworks to Melzi, ensuring that his knowledge would live on. He asked to be buried simply, with no great monuments or pomp. On May 2nd, 1519, Leonardo da Vinci died peacefully at Clos-Luce. According to some accounts, he passed away in the arms of King Francis himself, though history leaves this moment shrouded in reverent legend. He was laid to rest at the chapel of Saint-Hubert, near the Château d'Amboise. There, under the stones of the Loire, his body found rest. But Leonardo was never just of the earth. His mind had wandered among stars, his hands had drawn the blueprint of the modern world, and his heart had carried an enduring compassion that reached across centuries. His death marked the end of an era, but not the end of his story. In truth, Leonardo's story had just begun. His notebooks, thousands of pages filled with mirror writing and intricate diagrams, would be scattered, rediscovered, studied, and marveled at for generations. Artists like Raphael and Michelangelo followed in his footsteps. Scientists marveled at his anatomical sketches. Engineers built machines based on his ideas. Astronomers read his thoughts on the cosmos. And dreamers, most of all, held on to his belief that the world was full of hidden wonders. He influenced not only art and science, but also the way we think. His work anticipated modern fields like robotics, fluid dynamics, aeronautics, and even psychology. His legacy endures in the spirit of those who question, those who observe, and those who dare to see the invisible. Leonardo da Vinci was not only a painter or an inventor or a scientist, he was a witness to life, to mystery, to potential. He saw in shadows a story, in mechanics a miracle, in silence a kind of truth. He taught us that beauty and reason are not separate but intertwined, and that the quest to understand the world is as noble as the quest to change it. As Leonardo da Vinci's earthly story faded into the quiet of the French countryside, his true legacy began to awaken. What he left behind was not just a collection of paintings and drawings, but a way of seeing, a lens through which generations would explore beauty, truth, and the boundless possibilities of human thought. His influence transcends categories. To limit him to a title, artist, inventor, engineer, scientist, is to ignore the symphony of ideas that lived within him. Leonardo was not confined by discipline. He moved between realms like light through a prism, revealing every color of inquiry, every shade of discovery. And it is in that fluid movement that his legacy finds its power. In art, Leonardo's work became legend. The Mona Lisa, with her elusive smile, came to symbolize not only Renaissance portraiture, but the mystery of expression itself. Scholars, psychologists, and artists still debate the intention behind her gaze. Her smile has launched studies in emotion, symmetry, and perception. The Last Supper, meanwhile, remains one of the most analyzed and reproduced religious images in Western art, praised for its emotional depth and groundbreaking use of perspective. His notebooks, those restless fields of ink and mirror script, would pass through many hands, sometimes lost for centuries, only to resurface and astonish anew. They contain ideas hundreds of years ahead of their time, designs for flying machines, scuba gear, rotating bridges, and self-propelled carts. His anatomical studies, sketched with reverence and precision, laid the groundwork for modern medicine. Even today, doctors admire his depictions of the spine, the brain, and the vascular system. Leonardo's thoughts on optics and perspective would shape the study of light and vision. His mathematical insights contributed to geometry and proportion, and his city planning concepts foreshadowed urban architecture of the modern age. He was an engineer of the imagination, building bridges not only from stone, but from thought to action, from dream to form. And yet, perhaps Leonardo's greatest contribution was his example. He lived in pursuit of questions. He embraced uncertainty. He believed that everything, from the arc of a wing to the swirl of water, deserved attention. He was, in essence, the embodiment of the Renaissance ideal, a man whose curiosity knew no borders. He taught us that science and art are not opposites, but partners. That truth is often discovered in beauty, and beauty often holds the key to truth. In his fusion of disciplines, Leonardo showed how interconnected the world truly is. He would have smiled to know that centuries later, engineers study art and artists study biology, all following a path he helped illuminate. In the centuries after his death, great minds paid tribute to his genius. Michelangelo respected his vision, though they were rivals. Galileo admired his grasp of motion. Einstein spoke of Leonardo as someone who stood alone against the tide of ignorance. Modern thinkers, from Carl Sagan to Steve Jobs, have echoed Leonardo's belief that creativity emerges when diverse ideas converge. Institutions bear his name. Exhibitions circle the globe. His face appears on currency. His notebooks rest in the world's great libraries, and his works are projected onto museum walls where viewers weep quietly in the glow. And in classrooms, studios, laboratories, and workshops around the world, his spirit continues to whisper, observe more closely, imagine more freely. The Da Vinci legacy isn't just about admiration, it's about activation. To be inspired by Leonardo is to move, to try, to fail, and to try again. To sketch, to solve, to experiment, to dream. To walk into a forest or a gallery and see the universe in a leaf, in a brushstroke, in the bend of a beam of light. As you settle into the final moments of our story, let the echo of Leonardo's life hum gently in your thoughts. He was born into modest means in a village few had heard of. He had no formal university education. He faced doubts, setbacks, and illnesses, and yet he became one of the greatest minds the world has ever known, not because he had all the answers, but because he never stopped asking questions. His life reminds us that brilliance begins with wonder, that progress begins with looking, and that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply be curious. So as you drift further into rest, let Leonardo's world float beside you. Let his sketches become stars in the sky above your dreams. Let his questions mingle with yours. And know that you too are a part of the great human journey, to seek, to understand, and to create. Sleep well, and may your dreams carry you to places of wonder, where art meets science and curiosity has no end.